Good morning. I want to take a moment to thank the Ottawa Coalition to Prevent Violence Against Women and Crime Prevention Ottawa, providing all of us with a forum to discuss and share our experiences on this important issue. The Ottawa Police Service is committed to supporting victims and holding perpetrators accountable. We all know violence against women is too common. Partner Assault investigates an average of 4,500 incidents of domestic violence a year. Our sexual assault and child abuse section sees over 350 victims of sexual assault annually. In all these cases, an overwhelming majority of victims are women. Ending violence against women requires more than a police response. It requires a collective and committed response from the community. The I Can Manifest Change campaign highlights that prevention is key. Through education and discussion, men and boys are given the chance to think and act upon how they can help end violence against women. Violence against women is not a women's issue, and it is important to have conversations in all aspects and all circles of daily life, beyond the sports fields and classrooms and city council chambers. I stand before you as a police officer in uniform, a representative within society which brings expectations, to some extent, characterization and stigma. It's good and bad. If there is a purpose for us to be here today, it is to stand up and speak out against violence against women. As a police officer and a man, it is important to do so. But beyond what I am, it is perhaps more important to speak out because of who I am. Children are often the collateral victims of violence against women, and I am one of those affected. And please understand, it is not the man who stands before you making that statement, but the child who dwells within, who has been shaped by the forces of that violence. It does not define me, and that is my choice. The cause of my victimization happened as a result of what happened to my mother. She was mercilessly beaten to within an inch of her life and survived by taking the only choice she thought available to her at that time. So today, I speak to all the children that dwell inside of us. Buddha teaches us that no one saves us but ourselves. No one can and no one may. We ourselves must walk that path. I think that path does not have to be walked alone, though. On a cold and dreary evening in March of 1970, my mother found herself in a dark and horrifically dangerous path, not of her choosing, but of circumstances seemingly beyond her control. I say seemingly because the meaning of her life was taken away from her. First, by the loss and death of her husband, my father. Secondly, by the loss of her children, who were removed from her custody by forces who were designed to support but truly abandoned her in a time of need. And finally, by the man she sought refuge with, who abused and controlled her. On that night, she was alone and forced to choose between life and death. Her choice was survival, and she paid a price beyond measure. Yes, she killed her partner. She was beaten into unconsciousness and left on the floor. He passed out after a night of drinking with the gun he had used to play Russian roulette. He had placed it against her head and pulled the trigger. It was still in his hand. She was the first to rise up, though. Redemption, however, comes in many forms. And throughout the years after her release from prison, she became the mother, grandmother, and friend that everyone in our family had hoped and longed for. The irony, if it can be called that, was that prison didn't protect society from her. In the notoriously brutal Kingston Prison for Women, my mother finally got the help she needed. I don't remember my mother. Because at 6 months old, I was the first child adopted out of my family of 14 children. I was one of the lucky ones. I did not suffer the serious abuse as many of my brothers and sisters did at the hands of their foster parents. And therefore, my scars are not as evidence. But scarred I am. Redemption comes in many forms. And that opportunity to speak with you today is part of that. For you see, my mother's death reunited me with my 13 brothers and sisters who remained together throughout the years. It gave me an understanding and appreciation for what they had endured. But I remained silent on that issue for over 20 years until I walked a path with someone else that was seemingly left alone. Once more, another woman was forced to choose between life and death. That woman was Megan Patterson, and she is and always will be a hero to me. In June of 2003, Megan was shot in the head from behind and left for dead by her former boyfriend. But she was not alone that night, and 4 police officers had committed to intervene at all costs if we could. We couldn't stop the first bullet. He didn't get to fire the second into Megan as I smashed the door in instantly upon hearing the first shot. He chose that second bullet for himself. I watched him hit the ground as the door crashed inwards. I would like to think that we made a difference that night. We were prepared to do so. I think, though, it was Providence and Megan's own strength, along with that excellent medical care, that got her through it. One thing I do know for sure, though, is that she wasn't alone, and we held her hand and told her she was going to make it. That may have given her strength. She's certainly the strongest person I know. She's bulletproof. 10 years later, in November of 2013, we reunited with her, and we shared our story with the media. It was during that interview that I told my mother's story for the first time. You see, Megan inspired me to speak out. She held my hand and gave me strength to tell my mother's story. In doing so, I now choose to stand up and end this violence and speak to other men. One of those young men is my own son, who knows of this story and all its implications. As a husband, father, brother, and son, I owe it to the women in my life to speak out on their behalf. Redemption comes in many forms. On April 20th, 2014, my great-nephew Kai was brought into this world in the very room where his great-great-grandmother Bernice last slept. One day we will walk together down a path, and we'll have our own conversation. In a small way, we'll be ending the silence and shining the light for all those who need to be saved. For in doing so, they are not alone. I spoke of Providence intervening in Megan's instance. I believe my mother was with me that evening, guiding me through the door, not knowing what was on the other side. As her son, I wish there was some way I could have been with her on that dark night in March, 45 years ago, but not as a child, as a man. Redemption comes in many forms. Thank you for allowing me to share, and in doing so, giving my mother a voice.